Hi. There's been a lot of conversation lately about what critical race theory is and whether or not we should teach it in the schools and who needs to know about it. And I've decided that there's so much misunderstanding and confusion that I'd like to just throw in my little explanation, see what it's worth, see if anybody is interested in learning a little bit about it. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine. Just let me know and you can make a video too. But here's what I think critical race theory is and why we need to pay attention to it. First of all, what is a theory? A theory is a story. It's a story that hooks events together. So if a bunch of things happen and there's no coherence to it, like if there's an accident and there's 4 people on 4 street corners seeing the accident, nobody knows, quote unquote, what really happened. Somebody has to say, this is what we think happened, A to B to C to D. And then they wind up in court because everybody's got a theory about what really happened and whose fault it was. Critical race theory is a very fancy, very sophisticated theory about life in the United States. How this country was founded, how it's organized its financial, political, social, cultural systems, and how it treats different people differently, people particularly who are members of different what we call racial groups, even though we all know there's no such thing as race, there's just humans. But for our purposes, we have in the United States a concept of race that includes some people are black and they generally came from Africa, and some people who are white and they generally came from Europe. Everybody has theories. You have theories about why you married your spouse or didn't get married at all. You have theories about why your kids are different from each other. One's an athlete, one's a musician, one loves school, one hates school, one has a lot of friends, one doesn't have a lot of friends. You sit around, you think about it. All these little pieces of events happen, and you make up a theory about why the total picture is the way it is. What critical race theory does is to bring attention to a lot of events that have occurred in the history of the United States that the dominant theory doesn't pay any attention to. Now, what is the dominant theory of what the United States is? It doesn't have a name unless you want to call it white supremacy, but that aggravates people. So let's just say it's the story of our country. And the story of our country starts out with heroic people arriving here from Europe, living through the first winter, being helped by the native people who are already here, setting up governments, setting up colonies, setting up states, and they were pretty much, as far as we know, all people from Europe and what we now call white. That's how the United States of America got started on the North American continent. And that's one story. When did the United States start? Well, that's a matter of dispute right now. But the official story is we started on July 4th, 1776. This country was founded by a group of men of European descent. They wrote a number of documents, the Declaration of Independence, ultimately the Constitution. And they said, this is how we're going to run our country. And when they did that, they set up a system which said that initially white males who own property are more important than anybody else. Then they had a whole bunch of ranks. And at the bottom of no rank at all were the people from Africa who were brought here against their will, forced into compulsory labor at no wages. And ultimately, those inheritors of those founders designated the people from Africa as property and said, we're going to treat them like property. So that's how we got started. Our official theory is we started in 1776, we made a country, it was wonderful, we wave flags, we win wars, people come home, and everything is wonderful. Well, that's a good story, and everybody should be very proud. If that were the only story, that's a story to be proud of, but it's not the only story, and that's what critical race theory is all about. Critical race theory says, you know what? There were other people here, and they were doing other things, and they are not in the official story that we tell in the history books or in the classrooms or anyplace else. If you went to a pretty much normal American school, you probably think that the only black person that had anything to do with the revolution was Crispus Attucks, and he was one of the first people to get killed in Boston during the revolution. But at the same time that the revolution was going on, people of European descent, people of Caribbean descent, people from Africa, and native people, indigenous people, were all having a great deal to do with each other. They were farming, they were setting up little townships and little governments. And what most of us were never told is that the Constitution of the United States is based on the Constitution of the Iroquois Nation. We don't even know about that because nobody bothered. We took their Constitution, we applied it to European ideas, and we used it, but we don't teach our students that. So there's one thing we owe the indigenous people that we've never even talked about. So life went on, and we focused almost exclusively on the accomplishments of Europeans. And we told ourselves that enslaving people from another country was permissible, and that buying and selling people from another country or another continent was permissible, and that we're allowed to do that because we're in charge, and we were the white descendants of the European settlers. But you have to realize, theories are just theories. A whole bunch of events occurred. Most of us don't know that New York, prior to the Civil War, was a huge slave trading port, and there were tremendous numbers of black people who lived there. That New England, the area around Newport, was a huge slave trading port. That there were slaves in northeastern Connecticut who are buried in African cemeteries that are just now being excavated, have been excavated in the last few years. That the Hartford insurance companies have a great deal of experience insuring slaves as property. We don't know that. They don't teach you that in the public schools. So what is CRT trying to do? It's trying to say to everyone who lives here, there's more to the story than we originally were told. And a big part of the story is the contributions made by people of color and the abuses inflicted on people of color. And that it's extremely important that we all understand our total history, not simply the history seen through the lens of white people. We have always put white people in the foreground and people of color in the background. It is time to change lenses so that we can switch lenses and say, who was here first? Who arrived from someplace else? What are the indigenous ways of living on the North American continent? What are the imposed ways of living on the North American continent? Is this a fair system for all people? And I'd like to just give you an example of a time when it was so totally unfair that you couldn't miss it, and that was after World War II. After World War II, we didn't have just one GI Bill. We had two GI Bills, one for the white people and one for the black people. The white people got 2% mortgages and permission to go and money to go to college, and they all, lots of people went to college. They got careers. They became the American middle class. It was very solid and it was very good. The black people came back. A lot of black soldiers in the South were murdered in their uniforms because white people could not tolerate respecting soldiers who were black in uniform. They got the housing projects, which are horrible places to live. And they got scholarships to tech schools. They've never caught up economically. If you move into the current situation, there are all kinds of things built into our system that discriminate against black people, but you can't tell unless you look very closely. And I will leave that to you to find out what that is. But the question I want to leave you with is, what lens are you using when you try to understand American history? And do you want to broaden your lens? Do you want to understand what really made this country what it is? Where our wealth really came from? What can you do to learn more about the contributions of the people who came here either voluntarily or not voluntarily, but from places other than Europe? And are they getting a fair shake now? What can you do to learn more? What do you have to study? What can you do to ask your teachers in school to tell you about? And then finally, what can we all do to make this a land of opportunity for everybody on an equal playing field? Because that's what our national documents say, but it's not the way we behave. And I think everything that has happened in the last few years has pointed to the fact that it's time to make things equal and fair for all Americans and all people who have come to America. So think about it. What can you do? What do you need to learn? And is there any reason to be afraid of learning some more history? I don't think so. I think you're going to find it very interesting. So please enjoy. And if you'd like to talk to me more about it, go to my website, send me a note, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. Take care.